How's it going, guys? So in this tutorial, we're going to be creating this animation right here. It's almost entirely procedural from the hills, which are completely made in geometry nodes, and we're going to be tiling those hills so that the animation will loop seamlessly. The pattern is completely procedural as well. In the shader editor, we'll be creating all of those lines as well as the orange hilltops. After that, we're going to animate those lines in a seamless loop as well as the camera to really finish off this really cool animation. Now, this animation is actually lesson number 10 from a motion graphics course I just released. It's 7 hours of training, 14 lessons where you're going to learn lots of geometry nodes, procedural shading, looping techniques, compositing, lighting, so much stuff in this. I spent several months on this course and I'm super proud of it. The course is going to be 25% off until January 15th. Again, 7 hours of content, 14 lessons, geometry nodes, lighting, looping, shading, tons of other things. Feel free to check that out. Now let's get into the lesson. All right, so first, let's go ahead and get in a plane as we always do for geometry nodes and hop straight into the geometry nodes workspace. I'm going to go ahead and kill that window. So first, let's go ahead and create the displacement, basically the hills that create this animation. So we're going to click New, and we're going to hit Shift A and get in a grid. Do that. Now we have our grid. We're going to do up here size of 20, going that way, and then a Y of 40. So it's really 10 by 20. And then we're going to subdivide it here. So right here on the X, we'll do 100. And then to make them square, we have to double it. So we'll do 200. So now we have square faces and we are ready to displace. So we're going to get that gatekeeper set position node. And then we need to get our combine XYZ because we need to just displace this direction and we need to be able to access that instead of displacing all three at the same time. So we're going to get that COMB, combine XYZ, and then we'll plug it into the offset. And now we have this that we can now use our noise texture and plug that into the Z. Now we have this. I'm going to bring my detail to 3 and my scale to 0.15. So now we have just some simple displacement. Now let's get in that vector math node. Plug it there and go from add to multiply. And then we'll get that value node to get all these 3 at one time. So we'll plug that there. And then we will displace him like so. I'm going to go ahead and get in a color ramp and bring this in till the ground, till it's just touching the baseline. So see how it flat lines there? I want it to just touch so that when we go ahead and bring up that value, it brings it up. Of course, it's flatlining there, so let's bring it up until we go right about there. And you could see it more once we add in that procedural material. So like here. So now we have good displacement, and then we are going to displace it by 5. So here we go. We have our hills set up, and now is a good time to demonstrate a problem that we're going to run into once we start to duplicate this to make it a seamless animation. So first, right over here, we're going to get that set shade smooth node and smooth it out. And if I were to just say, imagine I'm going to hit Alt D here to make an instance, and then I bring it over here so we can duplicate it. You'll notice this big gap right here when we duplicate it, and that's because this is not a seamless texture that we can tile that direction. It eventually has a stopping point, so when we duplicate it, now this wouldn't break the loop, but what it does show is, hey, there's a pattern somewhere in this animation that has a stopping point, so we kind of know when the animation restarts. It won't break it, but it will be like this visual cue of where the scene stops. How do we prevent that? What we can do is hit Shift A, and we're going to go ahead and get an empty plane axis, and then we're going to bring him on the Y to the 20, which is the very edge of this model. And then we're going to go ahead and add modifier and get in a mirror modifier. Now this is the only non-procedural part of the lesson. So we're going to go ahead and select our mirror object right here, and then uncheck X and click Y, and we have now mirrored it. So what happens now is, let's just go ahead and hit M, new collection, create that new collection. Then I'm hit Shift A, collection instance, click on the loop, and then I'm going to hold down Control and then snap it to the edge. And so now when our camera gets to here, he'll just keep going and we won't see a gap right there. So now we've created a seamless pattern out of a procedural texture, and that's really fun. That's a lot of power there. So mirroring things gives you that the power to basically make something seamless visually. Now let's go back to geometry nodes. So you have to click on the modifier here, and we're ready for materials. So I'm gonna hit Shift A and then get a set material node, put it there. Let's go over here and get in a new material, and then we're gonna select it here. And you can name it if you want, but we're really only making 2 materials, so the organization doesn't need to really be very hefty. So we'll do that. Before we go in though, he is kind of low poly and you'll see it in the material. So before we get in, we'll get a subdivision surface. And make sure you do subdivision surface, not subdivide mesh. Subdivide mesh will subdivide it, but it won't smooth things out. The subdivision surface will smooth it out for us, and we'll do a level of 2, which is quite a bit, quite dense. But it's very, the lower poly you get, the more obvious it shows in the material in this special circumstance. So let's head into shading and let's create this really cool material. Now, before we do, we are going to be rendering in Eevee, so we do have to do a little bit of initial setup. So we're going to go here to the camera icon, switch to Eevee, and then we're going to click on the material here, and right down here, with cycles, you don't have to do this step. Transparency works automatically. But with Eevee, you have to kind of tell it, hey, please be transparent. And so here on blend mode, we're going to go to alpha blend. Now you have clip, hashed, and blend. And all 3 do something different, and you can kind of play with those, and there's a very visual difference in the 2. I have never seen an instance where these are usable really, but we're going to do alpha blend, and that's going to help us blend those together. Now let's go ahead and delete the principled. We're going to hit Shift A and get in a mix shader, because we're going to mix together 2 things. So mix shader, and I don't know if I've covered this yet, so let's go ahead and talk about it. There's a difference between the mix color and the mix shader, and here's the difference. A shader is like an emission or a principled BSDF, different things like that, and you have that as shaders. These are all shaders, right? Like specular BSDF. These are shaders. So when you are mixing 2 of those things together, you will use this guy to mix them. Mixed color is when you're mixing textures. So you have, brick texture and noise texture and Voronoi and all of this stuff. When you are playing with those, you will use a mix color. You can't interchange these. So that is why we're going to use a mix shader, because we're mixing 2 shaders here. So let's get him, and we're going to get a emission, that shader here, and we're going to get a transparent. So now we're going to get, now make sure you don't click on translucent. I make that mistake all the time. Plug that there, and now he is working. You can play with this factor to make sure your transparency is working here. So I'm going to bring him up, and we're going to get in a color ramp. So plug the color ramp into the factor, and we're going to get a wave texture. Plug him into the color ramp, and then we're going to hit Control T. Make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, and turn on use the object coordinate. So notice all these little lines, these waves. We're going to bring our scale down a little bit, and then you can see they're nice and faded. I mean nice and like gradiented. We want a hard edge, so we're going to go from linear to constant, and then bring that in, and now we have our little lines. And then the magic part is right here. On the X, we're going to switch that over to Z, and now we have our hills, and then you can bring that scale up to show that. It's pretty cool. And you can always edit this more later. And then you have your emission color here, so you can switch over to whatever color you want, which now is a good time to say, hey, we're going to switch our color management over to filmic, and high contrast. All right, so we have our hills now and make them nice and blue, and the strength is too high, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and create the gradient piece on top, and we're going to switch right up here to the main render view, world icon. We're going to bring that to black. So let's create that gradient. So what we need to do is get another mix shader. So I hit Shift D, and then I'm going to hit Shift D on the emission, and we're going to plug that into shader. And we're going to switch him over to kind of a yellowy orange, and we can, of course, adjust that later, as always. Now, to control this guy, we're going to get a color ramp, plug that into the factor, and we're going to get a gradient this time, G-R-A-D, to bring a gradient to the top of our hills. So let's plug that right here. And then we're going to get our own, a new mapping setup, because we are going to move him around. So now we have that. On the Y, we're going to switch it to 90. And then on the X, you can move him up to create these hills. And then if you want to have a smoother transition from nothing to gradient, you'll go from linear to B-spline, and that's going to create our smoothest option. And so you can really adjust that there. And now we have our hills, and you can bring them down a little bit. And hey, they're too bright, all that craziness. You can essentially adjust your opacity with your blacks and white. Black means total opacity, completely see-through. White means you can't see through it at all. And so what I'm going to do is bring it down a little bit so that we can still kind of see through the tops of the hills. And then you can bring that location up a little bit more. Of course, we can always change that as we go. Now, how do we create that flicker of brightness animation within the wave texture to give this some really interesting movement? And that is going to be with color, our emission color. So we have this wave texture, and if we play with the phase offset, this guy can move. And we have the ability now to use this movement to affect the brightness of color and use with masking, basically. So what we'll do is we're going to get in a color ramp. Get a color ramp here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over this guy, hit Control C to copy the color. I'm going to click on him, Control V. We're going to click on him, Control V. And with this guy, bring him to a darker color. Then we're going to go from linear to constant, and then just bring it to 0.5. Well, actually, this guy to 0.5 to cut it in half. So we'll plug that right into the color. So now we are going to get a new wave texture, and we're going to tell it to basically, and here's a cool trick, if you have the node wrangler enabled, hit Control Shift D, and that'll keep him connected. So we're going to move this here. So now what's going to happen is it's the same thing. Watch. It's the same thing here. So if I play with my phase offset, it'll go on, off, on, off, on, off, because it's quite literally moving. This guy is moving, right? That's what it's doing. On, off, because this guy is sitting. You can't really see it because he's controlling color, but here's what's fun. If you bring up the scale, you can now play with that on and off. And if you bring it bigger, you have an even more interesting look. And you can go crazy with it if you want. Looks like, honestly, I am liking right around 14 or 15 and then if you bring this, you can have less. This color ramp is less or more that are allowing you to make this flicker animation. And I mean, it's so cool. It looks so awesome. I love it. There we go. That's the material. Now we can go ahead and animate our camera to fly through here. So I'm gonna hit the tilde key to go to the front so that our cameras, well, it won't even really matter. Let's just go ahead and click on our camera. And because this guy is 20, 20, it's really 40 in the geometry nodes, but 20 here physically. So we need to go here on the Y, which we are not clicked on our camera. Click on your camera here, and then do -20, and then we'll bring him up, which I know on the Z, he's gonna need to be 10. And then we have him looking way up here. We're going to bring him 60, rotation of 60 to look down. So 10 on the Z, 60, or whatever you want it to be. This is just the angle that I am working with. Now we can go ahead and animate this thing. So we'll go to the top, tilde key to go to the top. You can actually see where I mirrored it, because this is normally where you would stop the camera at the -20, because our camera is at -20. But in this case, we're doubling it. So he is going to here, which is the 60. And the way you can figure that out, we're going to hover over here on the timeline and go back to the frame 0. Click on that camera, click here. And then again, we can visually see where the mirror happens and then where it stops. And we can click on it. We go, oh, okay, yeah. We could see this is where this collection ends. And we have this nice little things here. So we can click on the camera here, click to go to the frame 250. But in this case, because I've already made this, I know that is going to be too fast. We need to double it, 500 frames. Because it's Eevee, that's okay. We're going to go to 500 frames, and then I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to bring it, and I guess we can zoom in a little bit here to make it less difficult. So we're starting here, we're holding down Control, and we would normally stop here, we can see, on the +20, but now we want to actually stop here, again, which is the end of our instance. So holding down Control, boom, +60. So you can know, hey, don't want to stop here, that's 59. Don't want to go here, that's 61. We need a whole number, which is 60. So that's how we can kind of mentally know, all right, we're in the right spot. Stop there. So now we're here. We can see this. In a way, if you say, all right, all this stuff around here is too distracting, you can click on the camera, go to the green camera icon on viewport display, just bring that Passepartout up. Is Passepartout French? I don't know, but that's the word. It's kind of cut off here. Passepartout. All right, so now we have this going on. We have something really cool. Let's go ahead and animate the wave texture. So we'll go back to shading, hit 0, and then now we can go ahead and animate the wave. So we're going to animate the wave that's connected to the color ramp that has those two colors. So we're going to bring that phase offset to 0. Let's go ahead and bring this timeline up to get a new timeline. We are at frame 0. That's really important. Now we're going to hit I, go to the very end. And remember, for the wave texture to loop, you need to do a even number *pi. And I know that 40 in this case is a really good speed. So we're going to do 4. Oops. We're at the end of the timeline. 500. Yep. Okay. 40 *pi, enter, and then we're just going to hit I again. And now we can see that phase offset doing what that phase offset wants to do. Now quickly, now that we're still in shading, everything's really bright and vibrant and cool. What I want to do is add a very subtle effect, and that is with that volume here. So we'll right here in the world settings, click on volume, and then we're going to go to a principled volume, and then bring your density to 0.16. And then everything is really dark, but what it's going to do is create a fading effect out in the distance, and that's what we want. So we can just focus on this. So what we're going to do is just bring this orange a lot brighter, bring this blue a lot brighter here, and there we go. Everything is back, but now we have a fading effect. So now you can see this is slightly darker than this. It's very subtle, but for me, it makes me happy, and I like being happy. So we're going to run with it. And there we go. Now we have this really, really nice looking animation. I'm going to maybe bring my gradient up a little bit to make it look like bigger islands. And I'm really happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and maybe make this blue slightly darker to accentuate that phase animation here of them going up and down. Now let's create a grid floor to really make this look digital and mappy and cool. This is kind of like a topographic map animation. So we're going to go ahead and create a new geometry nodes tree. So we're going to hit Shift A, get a plane, and I'm just going to bring that plane up. And then we're going to go back to geometry nodes. And then we're going to click New. We can see him right there. And we're going to get a grid. Classic grid. But now we know, hey, this guy, he is on the Y 40. So I'm going to go back to my new plane here, and I'll just call him grid just to see him. I put two R's. Oh well. So we know, hey, this guy is a Y of, we're going to go back, a Y size of 40, but remember that we mirrored it, we duplicated it. So really it's 80. So let's go back to our grid and do our Y size of 80. And then we'll do a size X of 10. Actually, no, he needs to be 20. Of 20. And then we can see, hey, this guy's not long enough. We're just going to go ahead and see, where does he need to be? Right there. So you can visually see where we need to stop this plane, and I'm holding down Control to snap it to view. But if you want to do exactly what I'm doing, he is on the 20, the Y of 20, and then we're going to bring him to right about here. But this part isn't super necessary to be exact. Now we have this. We're going to go back to the shading and give him a really cool material. So I'm going to click New. We're going to delete this guy. I'm going to go ahead and remove my timeline so we can have some more space. Of course, since we are in Eevee, each material, we're going to go over to the material section. Each material needs to have that alpha blend turned on. So here in the shader, we're going to go ahead and get in a mix shader here. Same exact process. We're going to get an emission. And we're going to get a transparent. Transparent BSDF, plug it here. So now we're going to go ahead and get in a color ramp. So we'll just plug him into the factor, and we're going to get on our Voronoi texture. We're going to hit Control T and then use the object coordinate, of course, and then plug distance into the color ramp. Now you'll notice nothing's happening, and that's because we need to go back to geometry nodes and select, it will enable that material. So we'll hit Set Material, slightly annoying, but we have it right here, Material 001. We'll go back to shading, and there he is in all of his glory. Now I can see it's not going to work properly because we need to flip the color ramp and then bring our random in, and then we can bring in to get our dots. And then let's go ahead and go to a constant offset so we can get solid dots and bring that emission color. So I'm going to go ahead and click him. Hover over here, Control C, just steal that color, and then we'll click back. You can double click just to get that, or you can click on the grid here in the outliner. And right here on the emission, Control V, there we go, we have that, and then bring up that. And then I'll bring my scale to like 3 on the dots, and then bring them down till they're not super distracting, but they create this nice style. Next thing we're going to do is just add one more pattern to this. So we're going to get a mix color. Go here, and then I'm going to go ahead again, paste in that orange color here. Bring it up. Let's get a color ramp. Now we're going to go ahead to marry a cross, like well, in this case, it's going to be like a grid checker type of texture. So plug that into the factor. We're going to get a brick. And this brick texture is how I create my grid materials. And you guys saw that when we were creating kind of the basics. So plug that mapping into the vector right here, this guy. So you can hit G and kind of bring him to the middle. Plug vector into vector, color into color ramp. So now we have our bricks. So let's go ahead and turn them into what we actually want them to look like. So bring that offset over. These guys, bring them to a pure white. And then we're going to flip the color ramp so we can get a wireframe looking. Row width and row height, just click and drag and do a scale of 1. Mortar smoothness to 0. And then you can bring your scale to 1 as well. There we go. And then your mortar size, maybe 0.005. And then maybe bring that scale to like 0.5, something like that. Keeping the scale here, all these numbers, this number and this number at whole numbers will keep the grid looking proper. And then we'll do like 0.001. There we go. That's a really nice subtle grid. And then maybe on the Voronoi, which is this color ramp here, maybe make them a little smaller as well, which allows you to make them a little brighter. So bring the brightness to 0, they disappear. You can bring them back to just kind of gauge how you want this whole thing to look. And now we're here. I would even add more frames. Like even this is almost too quick, but we're going to leave it. And we're going to add some quick compositing effects to kind of wrap this all up. So I'm going to go to a frame that I really think is nice. I like this frame here. And then I'm going to go ahead and render the image. Shouldn't be very long, super quick. All right. Then we'll go to compositing, use nodes, and then I'm going to hit Shift A, get in a viewer, plug him here, and then Shift right click, slice to combine them. And then I'm just going to zoom in really quick so you guys can see it. I'm going to get in a lens distortion node. And all I want to do is add some noise to this. So what I'm going to do is here on the dispersion, we're going to click on jitter, which adds this noise. And then I'm on the dispersion, I'm going to do 0.05. And that is going to add, we're going to go back to fit. That's going to add a little dispersion on the outside here. And honestly, that's too much. We'll do 0.01 just to make it really subtle. You can kind of see it here, but also, most importantly for me, we get this noise. You can see some green showing up and all of that. And I really, really like the way that looks. So if we go back to layout and we click this drop down, we'll click always. And now we can see the noise being introduced. See that noise now? We'll go ahead and turn it off and then turn it on. Boom. Just very subtle, but I just love the way that it ties it together. Preference, I guess. But we are now finished with our animation and it looks awesome. I love it. I think it looks cool. Maybe I'll go back to the shading tab and we'll click on the hills here and then the wave. I kind of want my lines to be a little thinner. So maybe just adjust them like this. So we have that. Maybe make this a little bit more on the yellow end on the color. Just slight tweaking just to make this look perfect. Really, really cool looking here. Let's say we'll end on this frame. Let's render this out just to see our final look. There we go. We created a topographic map styled thing. It's really cool. 99% procedural here, and it's just a really powerful workflow. It's a completely seamless material, animation, and there's a lot to learn here. There's a lot to get from it. This is something that, if I was learning Blender, I would watch this several times and try to master this concept, master these materials. There's so many cool things here for MoGraph, and I love it. I'm in love with this design. Maybe I'm biased. With that being said, that's the end of this lesson. I will see you in the next one.